This podcast is sponsored by IQ Bar.
I've got good news and bad news. Here's the bad news. Most protein bars are packed with sugar and unpronounceable ingredients. The good news? There's a better option. I'm Will, and I created IQ Bar plant protein bars to empower doers like you with clean, delicious, low-sugar brain and body fuel. IQ Bars are packed with 12 grams of protein, brain nutrients like magnesium and lion's mane, and zero weird stuff. And right now, you can get 20% off all IQ Bar products, plus free shipping. Try our delicious IQ Bar sampler pack with 7 plant protein bars, 4 hydration mixes, and 4 enhanced coffee sticks. Clean ingredients, amazing taste, and you'll love how you feel. Refuel smarter, hydrate harder, caffeinate larger with IQ Bar.
Go to eatiqbar.com and enter code BAR20 to get 20% off all IQ Bar products, plus free shipping. Again, go to eatiqbar.com and enter code BAR20.
In early January, Venezuela's longtime president, Nicolás Maduro, was captured by U.S. forces, flown to New York, and placed in federal custody, a move that sent shockwaves across the world and raised a question that's been on pause for years. If Maduro's authoritarian regime is truly over, will Venezuela's once booming oil industry make a comeback? The South American country is home to roughly 17% of all oil on the planet.
According to their estimates, they have 300 billion barrels, which makes them actually even larger than Saudi Arabia. So they have the largest reserves in the world. There is some skepticism around how much of those 300 billion barrels could actually be produced, but it's still a massive oil resource.
That's Skip York, a non-resident fellow for global oil at the Baker Institute for Public Policy at Rice University. For several decades, Venezuela was a leader in oil production and was a rich country with a fast-growing economy.
Globally, Venezuela was one of the founding members of OPEC back in the late 1960s, early 1970s. And so they've had a long time been a player sort of in the geopolitics of oil, even before the days of OPEC. But that's another part of the reason why Venezuela is important to the global oil situation.
So how does the U.S. factor into this? Back in the 1990s, Venezuela's oil, which is a special strain of heavy, sour crude, was a resource that the country needed, so American oil companies invested billions of dollars and decades to build new refineries along the Gulf Coast that were designed to process this type of crude.
You have these refiners in the U.S. that made those investments, and now they want to earn a return on those investments. And Venezuelan oil is the best oil to suit those configurations. And so with the decline in Venezuela production over the last 20 years, they've had to go out and find other sources.
The U.S. eventually found other suppliers, but Venezuela's role was never easily replaced. To understand what might come next after Maduro's recent capture, York says it helps to look back at the rise and fall of the country's oil industry. At its peak, Venezuela was producing more than 3.5 million barrels of oil a day. That story begins in the 1950s, when the president of Venezuela at the time opened the country up to larger foreign investment.
He wanted not only the oil to be developed, but he wanted Venezuelan people trained and developed to work the operations in the fields and to benefit from it. So Venezuela benefited not only from producing the oil, but they also used that oil development as a way to spur other industries or to improve the education of the average the Venezuelans in the country. And so we go through the 1950s, we get to the 1970s, and the president of Venezuela at that time decides to nationalize the industry, meaning that he took ownership of the foreign oil companies' assets and he brought them back into the nation, and they created a company called PDVSA, and PDVSA is the national oil company of Venezuela. And PDVSA had those assets.
Venezuela was an outlier compared to other state oil producers. Its state-run company, PDVSA, became a symbol of stability and opportunity and was run by technical experts and engineers who knew how to manage complex oil assets. However, this began to change in the early 2000s after the president at the time, Hugo Chavez, moved to tighten political control over the industry after a large-scale strike.
In 2003, there was what was called the general strike broke out. largely people upset with the way that Chavez was running the country and the direction he was taking the country in. And a number of the leaders of that general strike movement were PDVSA employees. Now that strike gets broken. And as a result, Chavez feels that PDVSA has had too much autonomy. And so he's going to now reassert control over PDVSA by appointing people into positions in PDVSA. And he ends up firing, I think it was close to 2/3 of the workforce.
In a short period, experienced engineers and managers were pushed out and were replaced by people with little background in oil operations. The result was a rapid and severe decline.
What we saw was PDVSA's oil production went from 3.4 million barrels per day in around 2000, the early 2000s, and just went into a precipitous decline all the way down to about 600,000 barrels a day by 2020. And a lot of that is a couple of things. As you're replacing people, technocrats is what they were referred to as. You're replacing the competent people in PDVSA that had been fired, and now bringing in other people off the street that didn't have the background. As PDVSA's operations declined, the government doubled down and just kept bringing in, just trying to assert more and more control, rather than sort of let's go back to the formula that made PDVSA work in the 1990s. The government just kept doubling down and trying to exert more and more control. And the more control it tried to exert, the more production would decline. And that's what sort of drug. And when PDVSA declined, it took the rest of the economy with it, because it was, it is an oil-centric economy.
As oil output plummeted, so did revenue. And as conditions worsened and the government turned more oppressive, international sanctions followed, further isolating the industry.
There was no Venezuelan crude allowed into the U.S. for the longest period of time. Now there's some crude that's allowed in, but the sanctions really reduced the number of markets that the Venezuelans had access to. And the sanctions also, outside of oil, there also were financial sanctions that limited their access to international banking. And the consequence of those sanctions was that the Venezuelans started to do more and more deals with Chinese and Russian oil companies.
Cut off from many Western markets, Venezuela's government turned to these two countries for financing and made deals that left much of its oil already spoken for. As production kept declining, that left less oil to sell and less money coming in. Even Venezuela's own refineries began to fail, turning a country with some of the largest oil reserves in the world into a net importer of fuel.
Before Chavez, in the 1990s, early 2000s, Venezuela was actually a net exporter not only of crude oil, but also of petroleum products to other countries in Latin America. As PDVSA declines and goes into arrears and assets stop performing, even the refineries stop performing as well. And so now Venezuela has gone from being a net exporter of petroleum products to a net importer of petroleum products, which is a bit ironic for a country that is sitting on such a vast oil reserves. They have to import fuel products from other parts of the world. And of course, where they can import those products from are also limited, because those imports are also subject to sanctions.
With Maduro now in U.S. custody and political change possible, now the question is, will Venezuela's oil industry ever recover? And is there still enough global demand for it to have a seat at the table? We'll cover this topic in 2 weeks, in part 2 of this story. To learn more about our guest, Skip York, head to viewpointsradio.org. For more behind the scenes, search Viewpoints Radio on Instagram, X, and Facebook. This story was written by our executive producer, Amirah Zaveri. Our studio managers are Jay Silvers and Jason Dickey. I'm Gary Price.
Before you begin your road trip, ask yourself, do you really need 5 full suitcases? With the 2026 Kia Sportage X-Pro's class-leading cargo space, you'll have room for what you need. Find out more at your local Kia dealer today. Keep the adventure going. Kia, movement that inspires.
Call 800-3334-KIA for details. Always drive safely and obey all traffic laws. Comparisons based on second row legroom and cargo space behind second row seats in the subcompact SUV class according to Kia segmentation as of October 2025.